The day my husband chose my best friend over me, he looked me in the eyes and said, "A man deserves a son to carry his name." 2 years later, they laughed at me in front of an entire room. But neither of them knew I was carrying a secret that was about to change all of our lives forever. Introduction. My name is Hannah Collins, and for almost 11 years, I believed that love was stronger than disappointment. I met my husband, Daniel, when I was 24. He was charming, ambitious, and the kind of man who could make a crowded room feel empty with a single smile. We built our lives from nothing. We bought a tiny house with a leaking roof, worked double shifts to pay the mortgage, and dreamed about the family we would someday have. There was only one thing Daniel wanted more than success. He wanted a son. At first, I thought it was harmless. He would point at little boys playing baseball in the park and say, "One day, that'll be us." He talked about passing down his father's watch, teaching his future son to fish, and continuing the Collins family name. I wanted that dream too, but after years of trying for a baby, the dream slowly turned into a nightmare. Doctor appointments replaced date nights. Blood tests, medications, and treatments became part of our routine. Every month ended with another negative pregnancy test and another silent drive home. I blamed myself, even though every specialist told us the same thing. The infertility isn't only on one side. There are medical challenges for both of you. Daniel never accepted that answer. Instead, he became colder. Every family gathering was torture because his mother would smile sweetly and ask, "Any good news yet?" Daniel would make such a wonderful father. I would laugh and change the subject. Daniel would just stare at me. The only person who stood by my side through all of it was my best friend, Melissa. We'd known each other since college. She came to my appointments, brought over dinner when I couldn't stop crying, and hugged me every time another treatment failed. I trusted her with everything. I even trusted her enough to let her comfort Daniel when I couldn't. That was the biggest mistake of my life. One rainy Tuesday evening, I came home early from work because I had a splitting headache. As I opened the front door, I heard voices in the kitchen. Daniel was laughing. A laugh I hadn't heard in months. Then I heard Melissa say softly, "She can never give you the family you want." I froze. I looked around the corner and saw them standing closer than two friends ever should. Daniel's hand was resting on her waist, and she wasn't moving away. For a second, I actually convinced myself I was imagining it. Then he kissed her. The grocery bag slipped from my hand and crashed onto the floor. They both turned. Melissa's face went pale. Daniel, however, didn't even look guilty. He looked relieved. "Hannah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I remember every word of that conversation because some pain burns itself into your memory forever. He told me he had been seeing Melissa for months. He told me he was tired of waiting. And then he delivered the sentence that shattered what was left of my heart. "I want a real family. I want a son. Melissa can give me that." I looked at my best friend, expecting tears or regret. Instead, she lowered her eyes and placed a hand over her stomach. She was pregnant. I couldn't breathe. The woman who had held me while I cried over failed fertility treatments had secretly been sleeping with my husband and carrying his child. Within 3 weeks, Daniel moved out. Within 2 months, the divorce papers arrived. Within 6 months, they were married. People in our town whispered that Daniel had finally found happiness. They called Melissa his miracle. They said maybe God had simply put him with the wrong woman the first time. Nobody asked what happened to me. I sold the house because every room reminded me of the life I'd lost. I moved to a small apartment across town and buried myself in work. I stopped answering calls. I stopped going to church. I stopped believing that life was fair. Little by little, I rebuilt myself. I earned a promotion. I started volunteering at a local community center. I made new friends who knew nothing about my past. And for the first time in years, I stopped waiting for someone else to decide whether I was enough. Then, exactly 2 years after Daniel walked out, fate placed him directly in my path again. The community center was hosting a charity gala, and my company had sponsored the event. I had spent months organizing donations and helping arrange the evening. I was greeting guests at the entrance when I heard a familiar voice. Well, if it isn't Hannah. I turned around. Daniel stood there in a tailored black suit with Melissa by his side. She was wearing an expensive dress and holding the hand of a little blonde-haired boy who looked about 18 months old. The son he had left me to have. Melissa smiled with fake kindness. It's been a long time. I nodded politely and tried to walk away, but Daniel stepped in front of me. He looked me up and down and smirked. So this is what your life became? Organizing events while other people build families? I stayed silent. He leaned closer. You know, I almost feel sorry for you. But I made the right choice. Some women are meant to be wives and mothers, and some just aren't. Melissa didn't stop him. She actually laughed. Then Daniel bent down, picked up his little boy, and proudly announced loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "This is what winning looks like." The people around us smiled awkwardly, not knowing the history between us. I felt every eye in the room on me. For a moment, I was that broken woman again, the one holding divorce papers while her husband walked away with her best friend. But then something unexpected happened. An older gentleman across the room spotted me. The moment he did, his expression changed completely. He hurried over, ignored Daniel entirely, and wrapped me in a warm embrace. "My dear," he said loudly, "I've been looking everywhere for you. The board members are waiting. We can't start the ceremony without the woman who made this entire project possible." Daniel's confident smile faded. He looked at the older man, then back at me. "You know Mr. Whitmore?" he asked, suddenly nervous. I looked into my ex-husband's eyes for the first time without fear. And I smiled, because Daniel had no idea who I had become over the last 2 years. And he definitely had no idea that the man standing beside me was about to reveal a truth that would make his perfect little world come crashing. "Down!" Daniel's confident smile disappeared. The moment he heard the name, "Mr. Whitmore?" he repeated, staring at the older gentleman beside me. Arthur Whitmore wasn't just another guest at the charity gala. He was one of the wealthiest business owners in the state, the founder of the Whitmore Foundation, and the man whose name was attached to half the schools, hospitals, and community projects in our county. Daniel knew exactly who he was. Everyone did. Mr. Whitmore kept his hand gently on my shoulder and looked at me with the same kindness he had shown ever since we first met at the community center a year earlier. "There you are," he said. "The trustees have been asking for you. I told them tonight wouldn't even exist without Hannah." Daniel looked from him to me, completely confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. Mr. Whitmore frowned slightly. "You know Hannah?" Daniel forced an awkward laugh. She's my ex-wife." The older man's expression changed immediately. "Your ex-wife?" he repeated. "Interesting?" Melissa tightened her grip on their little boy's hand. I could see the color slowly draining from her face. Mr. Whitmore looked at me. "Would you mind joining me inside? They're waiting for the speech?" I nodded. As we walked away, I heard Daniel call after me. "Hannah, wait!" But for the first time in years, I didn't turn around. A year before that gala, I had met Arthur Whitmore by complete accident. I was volunteering at the community center on a Saturday afternoon when an elderly man collapsed near the entrance. Everyone panicked. Some people called for help, while others just stood there, frozen. I knelt beside him, kept him talking, and stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. I didn't know he was Arthur Whitmore. I didn't know the newspapers called him the lonely billionaire after his wife and daughter had died in a car accident years earlier. To me, he was just a frightened old man who needed someone beside him. A few weeks later, he invited me to lunch to thank me. I almost refused, but he insisted. That lunch turned into another, then another. He told me about his daughter, Lily, who had been almost my age. He showed me old photographs and admitted that after losing his family, he had buried himself in work because it hurt less than being alone. I told him about Daniel, about the fertility treatments, about the affair, about Melissa. I expected pity. Instead, Arthur simply looked at me and said something that stayed with me. The people who leave you in your darkest hour don't determine your worth. They reveal their own. Over the months, he became the father figure I never knew I needed. When the Whitemore Foundation started planning a new community project, he asked me to help. I threw myself into the work, organizing volunteers, sponsors, and fundraising events. That project became the charity gala where Daniel and Melissa had just walked into my life again. Inside the ballroom, I stood beside Arthur while he thanked the donors.
And before we continue,
Then he surprised
announced,
everyone. I want to recognize the woman who turned my small dream into reality. Without her compassion, determination, and kindness, none of this would have happened. He held out his hand toward me. Hannah Collins. The room erupted into applause. I walked onto the stage, my heart racing. As I accepted the plaque, I couldn't help noticing Daniel and Melissa standing near the back. Their smiles had vanished. People were whispering. One of Daniel's business associates approached him and asked, "You know her? Why didn't you ever tell us you were married to the director of the Whitmore Foundation's biggest project?" Daniel didn't answer, because he didn't know what to say. He had spent 2 years telling everyone I was a failure. Now those same people were looking at me with admiration. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, I received a message from an unknown number. I stared at the text for a long time before deleting it. I ignored that one too. Then my phone rang. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hannah," he said quietly. I hadn't heard his voice without arrogance in years. "What do you want, Daniel?" He was silent for a moment. "I made mistakes." I laughed before I could stop myself. Mistakes? Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Sleeping with my best friend while I was going through fertility treatments isn't a mistake. Hannah, please. Things aren't what they seem? I almost hung up. Then he said the one thing I never expected. "I'm not happy." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. He let out a long breath. "Melissa and we fight all the time. She changed after the baby was born." I closed my eyes. The nerve of this. "Man, you left me because you said she could give you the perfect family. I know. You stood in front of me and said I wasn't enough. I know. You humiliated me 3 nights ago." "I know," he whispered. Again, I should have felt satisfaction hearing the regret in his voice. Instead, I felt nothing, because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing his apology. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Daniel," I said calmly. "But you're looking for it in the wrong person." I ended the call. A week later, I was meeting Arthur for coffee when his assistant rushed into the office carrying a folder. "Sir," she said nervously, "I think you should see this." Arthur adjusted his glasses. "What is it?" "It's regarding the construction contract for the East Side Community Center." My stomach tightened. "That project was our biggest one yet, Arthur." Opened the folder and frowned. "The company handling the work has suddenly filed for bankruptcy." I looked down at the paperwork. Then I saw the name. "Daniel's company." Arthur looked at me carefully. "Is this related to your former husband?" I nodded slowly. Daniel had spent years building that business. It wasn't just struggling, it was collapsing. And according to the documents, there were allegations of financial misconduct, missing investor funds, and fraudulent accounting. The local papers picked up the story within days. Reporters gathered outside the company's offices. Clients canceled. Contracts, banks froze accounts. Rumors spread through town faster than wildfire. Then came the biggest shock of all. Melissa showed up at my apartment. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, I almost didn't recognize her. The expensive clothes were gone. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted. "I know you hate me," she said softly. I folded my arms. "What do you want?" She looked over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching. Then she said the last thing I ever expected to hear. "I need to tell you the truth about my son." I felt my entire body go still. She lowered her eyes, and tears began rolling down her cheeks. Daniel thinks that little boy is his. But there's something he doesn't know. I stared at her, unable to speak. She took a shaky breath. I was going to tell him. I swear I was. But then everything got out of control. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. What are you talking about, Melissa? She looked directly at me. The child Daniel destroyed our friendship for might not be his at all, and before I could ask another question, a black SUV pulled up outside my apartment building. Melissa looked through the window. The fear on her face was instant. Oh no, she whispered. I followed her gaze. Daniel had found us, and judging by the look in his eyes as he stepped out of the vehicle, he had heard enough to realize that the perfect life he had stolen from me was built on a lie. Daniel slammed the door of the black SUV so hard that the sound echoed across the parking lot. He wasn't alone. 2 men in dark suits climbed out behind him, probably lawyers or business partners. But Daniel didn't even look at them. His eyes were locked on Melissa, and then they shifted to me. For one strange second, the 3 of us stood there exactly as we had 2 years before, except the roles had changed. Back then, I had been the one begging for answers. Now they were the ones terrified of the truth. Melissa grabbed my arm. Her hand was shaking. Please, she whispered. Don't let him know. I pulled my arm away. You should have thought about that before you destroyed my marriage. Daniel reached the front steps and looked from me to Melissa. What did you mean? He demanded. What did you mean my son might not be mine? Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. He stepped closer. Answer me. The little boy, frightened by the shouting, started crying. Melissa quickly picked him up, holding him against her shoulder while tears streamed down her own face. I looked at the child. He was innocent. Whatever secrets the adults had buried, he had done nothing to deserve the storm about to hit his life. Daniel, I said quietly, this isn't the place. No, he snapped, never taking his eyes off Melissa. It's exactly the place. I've spent 2 years defending her to everyone. I lost friends because of her. I lost my marriage because of her. I gave up everything for this family. I almost laughed at the irony. He had not lost his marriage. He had thrown it away. Melissa finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I was going to tell you. When? Daniel shouted. After I spent my entire life raising another man's child? People had begun stopping on the sidewalk. Neighbors peeked through windows. A few had already pulled out their phones. Melissa closed her eyes. The baby. The dates never made sense. Daniel frowned. What dates? She looked at me for a brief second, then back at him. The week I found out I was pregnant. I had already ended things with you. His face twisted with confusion. What are you talking about? We were together. No, she whispered. Not just with you. The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel took a step backward as if she had physically hit him. You cheated on me? Melissa nodded, unable to meet his eyes. It happened once. I was scared. I didn't know who the father was. But when I found out I was pregnant, you were so happy. You kept saying it was the miracle we'd been waiting for. She broke down crying. And then you left Hannah. And I didn't know how to tell you. Daniel's entire body went still. He looked at the little boy in Melissa's arms, then at me. And for the first time since I had known him, I saw absolute fear in his eyes. The DNA test happened 3 weeks later. Wasn't there when they opened the results? I didn't want to. AI had spent enough years living inside their choices. But news travels quickly in a small town. Melissa's sister worked with one of my friends, and by lunchtime almost everyone knew. The test confirmed it. Daniel was not the child's biological father, the little boy he had sacrificed everything for. The son he had chosen over his wife, his marriage, and his own dignity was not his. The story spread like wildfire. The same people who had once whispered that I wasn't enough were now whispering about Daniel. People who had praised his perfect family suddenly avoided him. His business partners pulled away. Investors who were already nervous because of the financial investigation disappeared completely. Within a month, Collins' development group officially shut its doors. Daniel lost the company he had, spent a decade building, then he lost the house, then he lost almost every friend he had. But the hardest part wasn't losing his money. It was realizing that he had destroyed the one person who had truly loved him. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived at my apartment. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Daniel. I almost threw it away. Instead, I sat by the kitchen window and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Hannah, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. For 2 years, I blamed everyone except myself. I blamed fate. I blamed our doctors. I blamed you. The truth is, I was weak. I let my pride and my obsession with having a son turn me into someone I barely recognize. When I found out the boy wasn't mine, I wanted to hate Melissa. But then I realized I had done the exact same thing to you. I built my happiness on betrayal and expected life to reward me for it. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you'll ever care. But I need you to know one thing. You were never the problem. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. And I threw it away. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Then I put it in a drawer. Not because I wanted to keep it forever, but because I wanted to remember that closure doesn't always come from revenge. Sometimes it comes from hearing the truth. You waited years to hear. A few months later, Arthur invited me to dinner at his house. As we walked through his garden, he seemed unusually nervous. I've been meaning to ask you something, he said. I smiled. You own half the city, Arthur. I've never seen you nervous. He laughed softly. It's not about business. We sat on a bench overlooking the lake behind his home. You know, he began, after Lily died, I convinced myself that I had no family left. Then you came into my life. You reminded me what kindness looks like. I felt tears gathering in my eyes. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folder. I've spoken to my attorneys. If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to make it official. I looked at him, confused. He handed me the papers. They weren't business documents. They were adult adoption papers. Arthur wasn't asking me to work for him. He was asking me to become his daughter. Couldn't stop crying. I know I can never replace your father, he said gently. But if you'll let an old man have one more chance at having a family, I'd be honored. I hugged him so tightly he started laughing. You don't have to ask, I whispered. You already are. The adoption was small and private. No reporters, no big ceremony, just a handful of close friends and a judge. As we walked out of the courthouse, Arthur looked happier than I had ever seen him, and strangely, so did I. I had spent years believing I had lost everything, a husband, a best friend, the future I thought I was supposed to have. But life has a strange way of replacing what it takes from us, not with the same things, with better ones. About 6 months later, I was helping organize a children's reading event at the community center when I heard someone call my name. I turned around. It was Melissa. She looked older than her years, tired, quiet, humbled. The little boy stood beside her, holding her hand. She walked over slowly. I heard about the adoption, she said. I nodded. I'm happy for you. There was a long silence. Then she looked down at her son, the man who turned out to be his biological father, left before he was born. Daniel walked away after the DNA test. I looked at the little boy. He smiled shyly at me. I know I don't deserve your kindness, Melissa continued, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for Daniel. For everything. You trusted me and I betrayed you. I could hear the sincerity in her voice. Some wounds never fully heal. But carrying anger forever only keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. I knelt down and smiled at the little boy. Take good care of your mom, okay? He nodded seriously. Melissa burst into tears. She whispered, Thank you. And then she walked away. That was the last time I ever saw her. Almost a year later, Arthur and I attended the opening ceremony for the new Eastside Community Center. A brass plaque stood near the entrance. I stared at my new last name engraved in the metal. Arthur stood beside me. "Proud as ever, you know," he said. "People think family is only about blood." I smiled. "They're wrong." He nodded. "The people who are meant to stay in your life are the ones who choose you." As the crowd applauded and children ran through the playground behind us, I realized something I had never understood before. Daniel hadn't taken my future from me. He had simply walked away before he could be part of it. And somewhere out there, he would always have to live with the knowledge that he traded loyalty for illusion and lost them both. But I didn't have to carry that burden anymore, because the day he left me for the promise of a baby boy, I thought my life had ended. I was wrong. It was only making room for the people who were always meant to be part of it. Sometimes the greatest betrayal is not the end of your story, it is the painful beginning of the life you were always meant to have. The people who value you only for what you can give will eventually lose everything, but those who build their lives on love, loyalty, and kindness will always find a family worth fighting for.